it was a lay mission. Jesus himself was a lay person. He was not born of the tribe of Levi, but of the tribe of David, so he could not become a priest in the Jewish tradition. Interesting deal, right?
Yeah. I've heard some people express the opinion that Jesus could have been trained as a rabbi. What's your thought on
Some
that?
called him rabbi or teacher, but according to Mosaic law, only the Levitical priesthood could Jesus have been a priest if he was born of the tribe of Levi. So he could not have been a priest, one who offered sacrifice in the temple. So the other thing is that out of the 12 disciples, how many were rabbis or priests? Rabbis were teachers, priests were the ones who offered sacrifice.
None.
Aha. So pretty radical view. So enjoy reading Len's Forward, because I think he gives a fairly dramatic view, and I love the way he writes it. Of course, dedicated servers. You know, he's not just talking about people, the whole computer thing. It's a play on words. I know he's just playing on words. So have a little fun with that. While the ministry of all baptized believers is stated as the understanding of ministry based on baptismal vows, most denominations still lift up ordination as the bar for ministry, and this book is making the point that lay ministry is somewhere in between those two things. In between the bar of priesthood of all believers, the baptized, and the ordained set apart, there's another layer in there, and that's the layer that we're trying to get. Now, Michael Christensen's introduction is the priesthood of believers comes of age. And his particular issue here is how does, in the Advent, as he describes it, the third millennium of Christendom, does time come for a radical change in how to do the work of ministry in a technological age? So we had the nomadic age, we had the agrarian age, we had the industrial age, we had the information age, and now we have the technological age. Some would say we're coming to a social age because of the advent of social media, but I at least stop at the information age. The issues, and he gives a little oversight of each of the various chapters and who they are and what they do. And I'll try to relate to some of that as we go through the lectures. So let me just make a couple of comments. Are we videotaping now? Okay. So let me give a couple of comments about the various people. Jessica Moffett was at the Bixby, Oklahoma United Methodist Church at the time that we had her, and she went on to move to another state, another conference, and take one of the large membership churches. She was a staff member at the time. And she was, her appointment was to do development of Christian community ministries at the First United Methodist Church in Tulsa. So her whole focus was to get, as Len would like to describe it, out of doors. To get out of doors and to take a look at ministry outside of the regular and the traditional church. She also served as the mayor's appointed commission on the status of women, and she spoke internationally. She was a favored guest speaker at various conferences and convocations. So her chapter is titled Out of the Pew into the World, Motivating for Ministry. And it starts with an interesting story because she is a storyteller. And she talks about what's happening in the church and makes the point early on, and the point I always loved about Jessica is that there was a realness in her view of what ministry was. I think a lot of people have an unrealness about what ministry is. Either a artificial idea of what ministry is or a cocooned idea of what ministry is. If we're doing ministry right, we're protecting our congregation from the nasty world out there. So we come inside of ourselves and stay inside the four walls so that we can be safe from the terrible outside world. Well, Jessica always presented a healthy church is a church that serves. And in her particular viewpoint, at least the part that I enjoyed about the time we spent together planning these conferences as well as talking about them afterwards, was she often liked to make the emphasis on serving those who did not know anything about the church. Now, you might ask me, well, why do you think that would be interesting? Jesus did not spend most of his time with the religious people of the day. He spent most of his time with the people of the day who were outside of the life of the church. And why were they on the outside of the life of the church? Because the church had put barriers. The Jewish tradition had put barriers in the way of people having a more perfect relationship with the creating God. There were some people who were not allowed to come to the temple. If you had a deformity, if you were unclean, if you were spiritually unclean, if you didn't have money to pay for the doves or other things to sacrifice, did you have access to temple worship? The answer was no. If you were not born a Jew, did you have access to temple worship? No. So they spent a lot of time excluding others from worship. So who did Jesus spend his time with? Tax collectors and sinners. Right? The prostitutes. Well, I wasn't trying to look at the individual single act. I was trying to look at it in categories. Nor do I think I'll ask you particularly why you were focused on prostitutes. In my experience, those who preach against something is usually what they're struggling with. At any rate, coming back to Jessica Moffat and the book on lay ministry, you may want to make a note that on page 19, she provides early on a very clear understanding of 3 key old words describing lay ministry. They will probably be on the first quiz. No, I'm not going to tell you what they are. I've told you where they are. I thought that was a gift in and of itself. The other thing that I liked about Jessica is early on and well before the concept of Christian coaching or life coaching, Jessica uses the model of coach rather than teacher or providing direction to ministry. She talks very early on and about the issue of getting away from what she calls clergy as the quarterback syndrome. And I could give you a lot about what that means, but I'd rather have you read it in her words, in her book. But she talks about coaching people to do ministry. Now, you may know that I went through the Master Life Coach training, Christian Life Coach training. My certificate number is 0003. I'm either on the cutting edge or nobody else cares. Actually, I did all the training over a Christmas break after they announced it in November. So the director, the assistant director, and then me in the AACC have that issue. So I've been enamored with the concept of Christian coaching in large measure because of Jessica's presentation. The other thing that I like about her issue of out of the pew and into the world is the motivation for a ministry model. It's identifying the needs of the community and then responding to them. So the whole issue of community activism or being a community activist or community leader, that's all of the rage right now, isn't it? I mean, that's what Barack Obama did before running for Congress and before becoming president. And that's what many others are doing right now. Now, what's the difference between that and lay ministry? Getting out of the pew and out into the world as a ministry model is, the motivation for ministry begins with a feeling that God is calling you to do this, not simply because it's interesting, exciting, or needed. That lay ministry has as its basis a spiritual gift that God has given you and then has called you to use in a way that others will understand it to be ministry. So for me, that whole issue is doing something out of doors, getting out of the church to do something. And the real ministry moment becomes what? What you offered to the person in need, or the question that they asked. And if you've done it right, what's the question that they asked? Why are you doing this? Because at that moment you can tell them, because God has called me to do this. It was just the camera. It wasn't a mouse. Because God has called me. It becomes the perfect evangelism moment, because you're not trying to evangelize the person. You're responding to their question. So what kinds of things does Jessica lay out there. She lays out a medical clinic, a wheelchair ministry, an eye care clinic, legal counseling, dental clinic, used car ministry, ministry with the hearing impaired. No, that's not just yelling louder, that's actually recycling hearing aids. First jobs ministry, Christian business ministry, prison ministry, adopt a cop, a flower ministry. All these very practical ways to touch persons' lives, not necessarily in the way that they expect it, but doing it out of a sense of calling to get out of the pew and into the world. There must be no atmosphere of guilt. In other words, you can't be offering this in a way that makes the individual feel guilty. Meaning you can't offer it that I'm better than you are, or that you're doing something inappropriate and I'm here to help you stop that. New ministries can be started at any time is one of her issues, and it stops when the ministry is over. What's the biggest sin the church has done in the modern age? Everything they start, they can never stop. Even when it doesn't have any meaning, they keep doing it. Why? Because it's on the calendar. Her issue, and usually you can't start things unless it's part of the whole ministry year, right? Well, we have to wait till next fall to do that. And her old issue is that you can start at any time, but more importantly, you can stop when the need isn't there at any time. Is it necessary to have a staff person facilitate this motivation for ministry model? She presents this whole thing within a model of how you could take a ministry, motivation for ministry. And you know how I feel about models in the postmodern era. I don't like them. I like notions of ministry, so you can take concepts and contextualize them for your setting. So this would be a place that Jessica and I divide a little bit. I like notions of ministry, not models for ministry. But her whole point is that you don't have to have a staff person facilitate this, but clearly you would have to have someone who is organizing this as lay ministry, meaning they're being called to teach and organize based on a spiritual gift of being able to teach and organize. So that's my viewpoint of Jessica Moffat's Out of the Pew and Into the World. I'm going to give a